Hello, friends. I hope you can hear me. Um, I'd like to begin with the great invocation. Okay. And let's see if I can find the great invocation here. I always like to put it up, let's see if it will. I think it will. Yeah, you should see the great invocation now. Just in case one forgets a little verse. This is our treatise on cosmic fire in depth, and we continue to work. Michael, which program is this? Do you have that?
I'll get it.
Okay, that'd be great, because I have the program on the other other document that I left behind. We completed that one. So okay.
It's program 19.
Okay, program 19. Okay, and subtract 4, I suppose, because I did 4 of these programs on my own. So program 19 and 15, I guess. Now, let us do the great invocation together. Then I'll say hi to you. I'm glad to see you here. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Oh. 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 Thank you. Glad to see you all here. It's a bit early for the United States. Maybe California and Arizona can take it in, but after that, it gets to be the wee hours. So I just want to say hi to and Veronica, and also to Tuya here, who's listed as her phone, Annette, and Catherine, and Ishtar, and Joe Garso, and Joe, and Joan Schofield, and Leah, and Leon, I guess. This looks like that. Leon, I think so, or Lejon. And Lori, and Olivia, and Stephen Renneberg, and Zenaidi. And then to thank Michael Stacy, and Tuya for being on the other side of staff. Now, we are beginning a new section of commentary on page 35 of a treatise on cosmic fire. And all I have to do is find it, and we'll be good. Yeah, this is it. Now, there's a lot written here, and I would simply suggest that you go to Makara, www.makara.us, and you will find these written commentaries. Some of them have sections that need to be studied, and probably, although I did work on them a few years ago, they have not been studied exhaustively. Right here, there are some 50-something points on one question, which we can't really go through. But you can study these things if you wish. So I will mention just a little bit about them. This is the second section. And we're dealing now with fire by friction. There are 3 fires which create any manifestation: electric fire, fire by friction, and solar fire. The neutral type of electricity, about which so far very little is known except by occultists. DK tells us about the positive and negative poles, but not so much about the neutral pole. So DK tells us we purpose in these few introductory remarks to lay down the foundation for a treatise on cosmic fire, and to consider the subject of fire both macrocosmically and microcosmically, thus dealing with it from the standpoint of the solar system and the human being. So I think what you can see here is, although there are many larger systems, each larger system embracing a lesser system, which may be, after all, large in itself, DK is treating our solar system as if it were the macrocosm, and the individual human being as if it were the microcosm. Now, it's also true that a cosmic logos is a macrocosm, and a supercosmic logos is a macrocosm. If you fire, you would see the relationship between 5 different systems. My internet connection is unstable. That is not great. I hope you can continue to hear me. I hope it's okay. And it ends with something called the unknown on page 293. And that unknown is a great macrocosm. And compared to it, our solar system is like a microcosm. So this question of macrocosm and microcosm is one that is completely relative. If if we were tiny little atoms of matter on whatever planar level or subplane level, then we, the human being, would be the macrocosm to these tiny units, which would be microcosmic. So we're laying the foundation.
You muted yourself.
No, I'm not muted.
Well, we couldn't hear you for a minute.
Okay, well, it must be an unstable. I'm sorry about the instability, but if that happens, I have one solution, but it's not probably not available this morning. Let me know if I fade out of audibility, Michael. Thank you. Let's see what I was. Oh, I'm sorry, it cut across my thoughts. So, yeah. Well, anyway, we're dealing with the foundation of cosmic fire. It's going to be a kind of section to which we relate less than the large section on solar fire. And we might find that we can relate even more to, again, the shorter section at the end of the book on electric fire. But I left out the stanzas of Xian because I think it would be better for us to.
You're cutting out again. Okay, you came back.
Yeah, I'm back, but we don't want to deal with this all the way through, do we? I can take it into the temple and hope. If you will give me just a few moments, I will do my best to connect with an Ethernet in the temple.
Okay, let's pause
And
the recording.
yeah, please do, and I will hear me.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm using a Ethernet, which maybe is more reliable. Sometimes we're out here in the woods and cannot rely upon the signal. So anyway, that's it about macrocosm and microcosm. And let's see, I think we are recording. Okay, very good. Now, what DK says is to lay this foundation will necessitate some preliminary technicalities, which may at first perusal, and a perusal actually is not a superficial glance, it's a in-depth look, which may at first perusal be somewhat abstruse and complicated. May even, but which when meditated upon and studied may eventually prove illuminating and of an elucidating nature. And which also, when the mind has familiarized itself with some of the details, and that, we're dealing with a new language here for many of us, and we have to remember that this is a book written for the initiate consciousness. I mean, all of us can get something out of it, but it's only beginning at the third degree that this book is really going to be understood more accurately. So once the mind has familiarized itself with some of the details, what we learn here may be regarded as providing a logical hypothesis concerning the nature and origin of energy. Now, it is maybe a little difficult to discuss what energy is. We tend to say that all is energy, but that's not exactly true when it comes to absolute reality. Absolute reality is the source of energy, but not energy itself, at least in the ways that energy is usually described in our relativistic world. And Michael, I'm going to ask Tuya. Tuya, I hope you can hear me. If you would bring me my electricity, so for some other reason I don't fade out. Now we all have to remember we're in a Mercury retrograde period and unexpected things do happen. So if Tuya hears me, or Michael, if you can be kindly write her a little note to bring in the electricity. Okay.
I am here, but I cannot unmute. Yes, I do that.
Can you? Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Okay. So what have we learned here from this little paragraph? We have to be patient. And we're setting ourselves up here for understanding a kind of ground plan for future comprehension. And there will be unfamiliar details that we have to assimilate. And studying this book can appear at first, especially the first section, a little tedious and demanding, but we have to persist. And then later, we'll be able to grasp the wholeness of it. I'm not promising this to you or me in this particular life, but at least under the influence of pure reason, which is an infallible type of comprehension, which sees things with immediacy. So let's just say, as we become familiar with everything, and now I'm, sort of plugging in the electricity here, as we don't want to have, I assume that it's working better here in the temple.
You're not fading in and out. So yes, it's working much better.
I'm not in my Maya Varupa, fading in and out. Now here is energy. A little bit about energy, and then let's see, thank you, Tuya. It comes from the Greek and Latin, energia, geia, the Greek activity, or energos, active, and en and ergon. En is in and ergon, work. Now, so basically activity is how we detect energy, or the power to drive activity. However, if energy is associated with activity, it cannot be ultimately real. I say that because there can be no activity unless there is relativity. And there can be no relativity unless there is division or articulation or different points of perception which give the illusion of multiplicity. Things have to move. relative to each other. And if there is no relativity, no relativity in that sense, we cannot define energy in this way. And why is this important? Because when we get to the question of ultimate reality, there is no division whatsoever. And so there can be no activity when there is no division. So in a way, the ultimate reality that we read about in the secret doctrine as the absolute or the absoluteness is beyond the usual definitions of energy. Energy is something that is found more in the relativity of the universe. Now, different kinds of definitions appear here. The capacity of acting or being active. There's something here about intellectual energy, but the mind, of course, has its own divisions and can be active. Vigorous exertion of power. The capacity for doing work, all of these are in the relative world. Usable power and the resources for producing power. Well, maybe there we would come a little bit closer. We cannot define absoluteness, the absolute. You've been going over that, with Francis in his Secret Doctrine series. And we have no way of naming the absolute. We can try, and we can eliminate what it is not. Basically, it is not anything whatsoever. And then maybe as the field of perception clears, we will have a better idea of what absoluteness is and what energy is. But the minute we have a universe, and we do not have a universe all the time. Now, try to get that in our minds. We do not have a universe constantly. A universe is not an absolute continuity. It is kind of an intermittent, cyclic continuity. So with respect to what is semi-poetically called the Great Breath, we have an inbreathing and an outbreathing, an inbreathing and an outbreathing. We have an appearance, a disappearance, appearance, disappearance. And it all has to do with the fact of perception. So, just trying to get to the bottom of what is energy, because we're going to be dealing with it, and to realize that it is still a relative concept. Now, this is a philosophical approach. A scientist is not going to bother with this type of philosophy. They will simply accept that there is a capacity to be active, a capacity to do work, that there is movement. The movement is the result of power, and the power is simply available from ever higher sources, most of which they have not detected. But things move, and right there is the definition which prevents that statement from being real. Things move. There are no things in the world of super Maya, or let's say beyond Maya. And because there are no things, there is no division. And because there is no division, there can be no movement. Because movement always occurs relatively. Something moves relative to something else. Even a fixed position or another moving something. They move relative to each other. Reality is not that. And being is not that. As close as we can come to reality, we have the concept of being. But another thing I want to say, and maybe it should be noted, is that being does not move. There is no movement in this ultimate substratum that we call being. Okay, well, probably those thoughts are familiar to some of you, and maybe to some of you too, they seem a little bit, well, why are we dealing with these matters? But we have to sharpen the mind. It has to become acute so we can utilize what's called the acute energy of divine mental perception. The acute energy of divine mental perception, and that will take us on our way towards intuition. We have been discussing in the Identify as Being group the abstract mind and the faculty of intuition. We are engaged with that right now. And I do have one of our colleagues has sent some material from telepathy, which should be helpful in defining these things. So we have to learn how to use the fifth ray regarding the power of definition. Now, it is true that the idea of finitude, define, finite, is in this word definition. And we cannot really define absoluteness. We can more and more tell what it isn't. But in the attempt to be as sharp as we can with regard to what it isn't, we may begin to get the intuition through identification of what it is. And anytime, excuse me, DK's students were, had before them, the most of them, the second initiation. And from the time the second initiation is taken, from that period, we can begin to work with this thing that is not mental at all. It is called identification. And it puts us on the inside of our perceptions. Identification, I mean, it's a little contradictory, okay, but identification puts us on the inside so we feel our perceptions as if they were ourselves, which they are. And so we will discover ourselves ultimately, regardless of what is said here about all the details, we will discover ourselves to be the great immovability, a pure being. And maybe as we go through the book, more and more of that sense of what we ultimately are will dawn upon us. But here we are in the very beginning of the book, and so these fundamentals are not as filled with those absolute, those tendencies towards what goes on outside the universe or when there is no universe. I've got a bunch of things that, if you're interested, that you study them, because there are some 50-something things here, and we'll never move beyond one sentence if we study these. But maybe there is something that I can say that would sum up everything. We are dealing with the subject and the object in a cosmic sense. And we've all heard about Mula Prakriti, which means root matter. I think the word Mula is the root factor, and Prakriti is matter. And I would just like to say that we live in a psychological cosmos which exists because of self-perception. Now, this is maybe an unusual thought, or maybe you have considered it. We live in a psychological cosmos which exists because of self-perception, or I call it primal self-sight. The original self-sight in any universe. The one great universal being who is still in its scope a tiny thing compared to absolute infinity, super tiny, manages in ways we do not understand to focus consciousness with which it is endowed upon itself, and thus Mula Prakriti arises. So primal root matter that we discuss in the secret doctrine is a self-perception. It is the most unarticulated self-perception possible, and the root of all emanation, all distinction, all material perception. So in a way, in this psychological cosmos, the only way to create is to self-perceive. Okay, the only way to create anything, the act of creativity on the very highest levels of cosmos, is self-perception. So basically that tells us that no matter what we study, and there's plenty to study in this book, we're just working with our own understanding of our universal self. We are the tiny little microcosm relatively to many larger beings, but those beings themselves are microcosmic compared to the universal being. And the reason that beings exist, I don't mean being, I mean beings. In other words, the reason that existence says exist is because of the act of self-perception by the universal logos. So one day we will return into that great state, and even now we are there. That's the philosophy of it. I'm not going to, I think I could spend many programs if I were to cover all of these 53 points. But we understand that there is a great breadth, and that's taken up in the secret doctrine. And because there is a great breadth, it is an alternation between self-perception and non-self-perception. In other words, inside absoluteness, and you can't really use a word like inside, but in the absolute state, there is no self-perception, because you would have to divide the subject from the object, and you can't do it. But in a universe, or in the makings of a universe, a self-perception does exist. In other words, there's a kind of an outflow. And, don't ask me how it happens. These are the super mysteries as far as I know. There's kind of an outflow into a state of self-perception which provides many perceptions eventually. And this is dramatically, ultimately different from the boundless immutable principle. There's a problem with the first two fundamentals of the secret doctrine. The first fundamental tells us of the boundless, immutable principle. And the next fundamental tells us of periodicity and mutation. So right at the very height of the statements made about the relationship of reality to the universe, at least to the human mind, a kind of contradiction exists. Anyway, if you're interested in studying these things, maybe something will dawn. But if I were to take this up, I would take it up more in the more abstract study that arises with identify as being. Right now, we're about to deal with some very concrete things with fire by friction. So I'm sure you won't be too unhappy that I'm not going to go through these 53 points. I'm tempted, but I'll do it in another way. And it, of course, it involves the whole question of, is the universe finite, any universe, or is it infinite? And my opinion is all universes are self-enclosed finitudes, which when measured against articulated absoluteness are infinitesimals. Now, if that sounds like mathematical language of an abstract kind, it kind of is. But basically, no matter how big you get and how much is the magnitude of anything, it's really the tiniest of things. Now back to the Tibetan. We have elsewhere in an earlier book touched somewhat upon this matter, I suppose, of microcosm and macrocosm. Let's just see. The origin of energy, right? And the basis of understanding relativity. He says we have somewhat touched upon this matter, but we desire to recapitulate. Every good teacher does that. And in so doing, to enlarge, thus laying down a broad foundation upon which the subject matter can be built up, and providing a general outline which will serve to show the limits of our discussion. Now, DK is always saying something to the effect that many volumes could be written on this subject, or I could write many volumes on this subject, he says. So he has to limit the scope of what he's going to discuss. And it turns out he's just giving us the ABCs of the science of occultism, which basically is going to be understood even fragmentarily with fragmentary accuracy by the initiative of the third degree and beyond. So he's giving one of his teaching techniques here. We repeat, and then we enlarge upon the themes which are recapitulated. Now, all of this may seem very far from the kind of service needed in the world today, because we have a troubled world. We have people who can't even control their emotions. We have people who don't and won't think, even if they could. We have personality centrism, which leads to all kinds of glamours and illusions. So we have a serious problem in an endangered humanity. However, the effort to study with accuracy the real foundations of the world we live in is ultimately helpful. And while we don't do this all the time, even doing it sometime will put us in touch with the fundamentals and give us a sense of spiritual confidence, spiritual security. We will no longer be at sea. We will be anchored in greater and greater approximations of reality. So he goes on and says, let us therefore look at the subject macrocosmically and then trace the correspondence in the microcosm of the human being. Now, 4 types of atoms I've mentioned before are developed or analyzed in this book, A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. Now, right now, he seems to be talking largely of 2 of them, but the atom of substance, the human atom, the planetary atom, about which information can be very obscure because it's quite close to us, and then the solar atom, the solar logos, the god of our particular solar system, which is sometimes called a universe. And you know, what I've discovered is that it's sometimes easier to understand the correspondence between the solar atom and the human atom than it is to understand the correspondence between the planetary atom and the human atom. Maybe too much information would be revealed if there were not so many veils dropped over the planetary atom. About the solar atom, there's not much we can do, but the planetary atom is so close that we could, in group form, and if we were not rightly motivated, obstruct progress. So fire in the macrocosm, it is essential, in its essential nature, fire is threefold. And you'll know what I mean by that. Electric fire, solar fire, and fire by friction. But when in manifestation, it can be seen as a 5-fold demonstration and defined as follows. Well, we're into the realm of nama and rupa, name and form. And the 5-pointed star can be our symbol, this 5-fold demonstration. So the first 2 fires, fire by friction and solar fire, if we start from the bottom up, they will account, they are dual, and thus will account for the 5-fold demonstration. You look at a 5-pointed star, the 2 legs give you duality, nama and rupa, basically the anchoring of the triangle in form via nama, name and form. The next two fires are also dual, that's solar fire, but fire by electric fire is unitary. And when we get into the study of electric fire, and if we can at all assimilate it or have it enter into our consciousness, we realize that electric fire reveals the one. Electric fire reveals oneness. So there are all these different points of view, and DK is very versatile in changing points of view. You know, he has a lot of Gemini, the messenger, in his chart. Masters have charts, usually of two particular energies which they use, you know, like Master KH has Pisces and Gemini, and Master Moria Aries and Leo, and the Buddha Taurus and Pisces, and the Christ, in my estimation, Pisces and Libra. You know, they have distinguishing energetic traits that they work with over a long period of time. And DK started to give out some of that information in the disciples degree, which I think is accessible on the internet. I can't say where it is right now, but I know it's there. And when I look at Master DK, although I, you know, of course could be incorrect, but I see Gemini and Taurus, a very brilliant light, and the flexibility to relate all these various factors in the presentation of that great science that I would call the science of relations. To me, it seems like the supreme science, the science of relations. Now, I know that he has sometimes said, well, what has he sometimes said? That, well, I'll just have to come back to that to find out what he has sometimes said. Yes, yeah, he has said that astrology is the greatest and oldest of all the sciences, but more fundamental, more a common denominator seems to be, to me, the science of relations. It seems to underpin the science of astrology and to underpin the science of the rays, and really underpin any type of science in which we are studying the object in itself and its relations to every other studied object or perception. I mean, after all, objects are perceptions. So anyway, threefold fire and fivefold fire when in manifestation. Now, we just have to kind of, you know, deal with this and internalize it the best we can. And here is the word internal. What is fire by friction? It's the lowest fire, and it is related to the third aspect of divinity. Of course, you might question, what is fire itself? Again, if you name a specific thing, it is not reality. It's enough reality to work out in a universe. But in terms of ultimate reality, which Madame Blavatsky seems to call the eternal parent, it can't be called anything, and it cannot be called fire. So in a way, fire is an intra within, right? Intra-universal noumenon. A noumenon is a high cause of something that manifests more outwardly as a phenomenon. So fire is an intra-universal noumenon. And I'm going to, lest I forget it, fire is an intra. I better go to, intra-universal noumenon. The philosopher Kant, Immanuel Kant, he dealt a lot with noumena and phenomena. Now, if you think about the etheric body, it provides noumena for the phenomena of the dense physical body. That's how it goes. Every substanding state, every state that underlies a more obvious and crude state is noumenal to that more objective phenomenal state. So that's one of the words we want to know when we deal with occult philosophy. Now, obviously, fire is not going to be the kind of fire, fire in general is not going to be the kind of fire that we witness in the fireplace or a forest fire, or when we witness the salamanders, nature spirits, whose bodies are flame, doing what they do. It's something entirely different, and maybe in a way equivalent to energy and capable of generating different fires. See, there's the noumenon of fire, but then that noumenon generates phenomena that we call electric fire, solar fire, fire by friction, which are special cases, special phenomenal cases of the noumenon. So anyway, our objective solar system, that's what he talks about here, is composed of matter of the three lowest subplanes of the systemic physical plane. And if I had or were able to see it, this is the objective area. These 18 are objective for sure, and maybe 21 are objective when you think about the solar logos. I haven't quite decided whether planetary objectivity confines itself to the number 18, and that number in the tarot is the moon, and the moon philosophically represents the dense physical body. It's not our dense physical body, it's the dense physical body of the planetary logos, ruled by the number 18 and related to the moon. Now, interesting, 18 is a 9. And 9 is the cyclic number for the third ray. Now, if you look at, you include now the 21 lower subplanes, and we have the dense physical body of the solar logos, and again, 2 and 1 make 3. So you're into that third aspect of divinity with the 2 and the 9. And basically, although we consider our egoic lotus to be spiritual, and from a planetary sense it is. From a solar systemic sense, it is material. And maybe when we think about the causal body of the solar logos and so forth, we will have to deal with cosmic materiality. That in itself is interesting, where those causal bodies are located for the greater beings. But here, our causal body is material. It's like a scabbard for a sword. And the sword is the sword of spirit or higher consciousness, and it needs its vehicle. So basically, what we're all trying to do first through our meditation is to leave behind the 18 lower subplanes, or one way of looking at it, the dense physical body of the planetary logos. What we then hope to do through the building of the Antakarana is leave behind the 21 lower subplanes, which are the dense physical body of the solar logos. And the masters have done that. They have done that. Okay. Now, going back to screen share, and Michael will let me know if I missed something here. So the objective solar system is where we live mostly. We live in those 18 lower subplanes, and some people don't even live there. They just don't get into the mind. They have it, but it's undeveloped. They don't use it. And some people learn to meditate, and they can get into the higher part of the 21 lower subplanes. So they become solarized. Now, that's the reason that the third initiation, which deals with the ability to center yourself in the causal body, is considered the first solar initiation. People like ourselves are mostly dealing with preliminary initiations, number 1, number 2, initiations of the threshold. But the true meditator can get into his or her causal body and then take the first solar initiation. And of course, the egoic lotus looks like a solar instrument. So what do we have here? These fire by friction, the sum total of logoic kundalini. And basically he means not the planetary logos, but the solar logos. Fire by friction is the sum total of logoic kundalini, but it's not spread widely abroad yet. Believe it or not, our little planet is a major source of kundalini in our solar system, because our little planet, regardless of what other planets are associated with the base of the spine center, is the major base of the spine center of our solar logos, and hence the source of kundalini, but it's not yet in full systemic activity. There are some other planets involved. I think Saturn and Uranus are both involved in generating or spreading this logoic kundalini. Just use the power of analogy, and what you know about yourself, you can extrapolate onto our planetary logos as it seeks to evolve, and even onto our solar logos in its evolution. Yeah, some aspects are found to be physical when we're dealing with the Kundalini and fired by friction, but old. They come from a previous major solar system. And some aspects of the Kundalini are etheric in nature. And we depend upon fire by friction to produce what we normally call physical vitality. And the vitalization of matter, and we have to have a much more vital relationship with matter in the New Age under the seventh ray, is coming from the etheric planes, the systemic or solar etheric plane, not from the cosmic ethers, maybe ultimately, but we've got to be much more vital beings. And DK promises us that we will have much healthier bodies when we really understand how to manipulate fire by friction via the seventh ray, which is directly associated with the etheric body. And it's a age of air that we are entering, because Aquarius is an air sign. But both Aquarius and Gemini, forget the race cycle for a minute, are connected with the etheric body. And hence the vitalization is set to occur. And then the 2,500-year sub-cycle, which is a different cycle altogether, is on the seventh ray. So when you combine these two signs of Aquarius and Gemini with the cycle of the seventh ray, you get much better physical health. Maybe some of you have noticed, I have noticed that Gemini people, unless other circumstances or other energies contraindicate, stay youthful a long time. They are somehow able, I don't know, do they process the oxygen? Is it a relationship between oxygen and the ethers? They are known for their youthfulness, and they don't age in the same way, unless there are a lot of other circumstances that prevent the normal reaction. They carry a certain youth or youthfulness. It's, I think, because of the connection with the vitality of the etheric body, which transfers itself into the dense physical body. So anyway, fire by friction, the reason I'm getting into all this is that fire by friction does include the etheric plane. And it's usually divided into two parts, and we'll see what those parts are. They're usually called latent fire and radiatory fire. Radiatory fire is more etheric, and latent fire is more physical and older. The ancient fires. If you read your Treatise on White Magic, you'll see there's a danger point for the magician when his form is about to emerge onto the dense physical plane. He's encountering the ancient fires, and the etheric fires are not that. He's encountering what is not principled with regard to the human being, just the same way that the lower three planes, mental, emotional, and physical, are not cosmically principled with respect to the solar logos. Principles begin on the etheric plane, sometimes just called etheric body and prana. I don't think it's a very good way of dividing things, but prana I can see as a principle. But when it's dense physical, it's simply, excuse me, itchy nose here, it's going to be it's going to be from the past. density is merely an aggregation of matter of lower vibratory potential. So it's called, like, interesting, congestion. The dense physical vehicle is called by decay in cosmic fire a congestion in time-space. And obviously, although it's useful for redemptive purposes, we don't want to be caught in the congestion, which would mean just dense physical consciousness. One of the problems and enslavements of the Black Lodge, they are slavers, but they're also enslaved, is the fact that they are caught in the congestion of a great material deva from which they cannot release themselves. So anyway, fire by friction, it has two categories, and I think we'll get into that: latent fire and radiatory fire. Now, the whole new age is going to be based on the detection, the vision of, the manipulation of, the direction of radiatory fire. Up till now, we've had no real control over it unless one is an initiate. In other words, our physical bodies will be considered to be our etheric bodies. The real physical body is the etheric body, and eventually the congestion coming from the gathering of low quality matter from a previous solar system will be dissipated, and planets will appear, and human beings, I suppose, appear in their etheric body. They will have worked their way through the congestion, done what they can to redeem it, and will no longer be in need of it. So we're going to learn that solar fire, immediately below, and maybe I'm not going to be able to get into that right now, is fire from the cosmic mental plane. Wow, and that's very high. Solar fire is to be considered, there's a great solar angel up there, of which our solar angels, great as they are simply constituents. So the great solar angel of the solar logos is found on the cosmic mental plane. Did we know that there even was one? Our solar logos has a solar angel, and what that means is that great angel, which serves an analogous function to the function our solar angel serves, must be a very great being. Maybe a solar logos of the past, maybe, because our solar angel was a human being in the previous major solar system. So just use the analogy. We have something called the Grand Heavenly Man, the Lion of Cosmic Will, who is our solar logos, but he needs a solar angel. And maybe that solar angel, that vast being on the cosmic mental plane, responsible for our immediate access to solar fire, maybe that being was a solar logos before. Could be. We follow out the law of analogy when we can. So if the cosmic mental fire emanates from the cosmic mental plane, which, by the way, the Buddha touched in his 6th initiation, talk about achievement, then maybe fire by friction emanates from the cosmic physical plane. Maybe that is the case. Anyway, we're dealing with great fires here, and we want to know their lesser expressions that are relevant to us in our microcosmic worlds. So what we need as students of this book is the ability via the elevator of consciousness to go up, to go down, to go up, to go down as seamlessly as possible. Relate the high to the low and the low to the high without lurches, like shifting gears. You know, if you don't use the clutch properly, you're going to grind your gears. So we're learning how to flow in the mind between these macrocosmic considerations and more practical microcosmic considerations. These are the fundamentals, and we will learn at least something about them. We don't have to necessarily be initiates of the third degree. We'll learn at least something. So that was page 35 with a lot of filler in there. More filler. And I guess we have come to page 38. That's where we are. Okay, so what I'll say here is this is the end of a treatise on cosmic fire in depth. And I think Michael said program 19, and I'll make a slash here. 1950. Yeah, that's it, right?
That's correct. Program 15, group program 15, correct.
Yeah, group program, right. And we'll begin again next week with beginning of the treatise on cosmic fire in depth, program 20 and 16, I guess. We'll have to get rid of that discrepancy. I just got impatient and I had to do something. So I began, to talk before the group had assembled. Now today is the 26th, and when will we be meeting again? It reminds me of Macbeth. When shall we three meet again? It's the 3rd of July. All right, 3 July 20. Okay, friends, now I don't blame you or me for feeling that fundamentals are a little bit abstruse. And by abstruse, maybe we mean very refined or requiring very refined, acute understanding to really fathom what is being said. But if we lay the foundation carefully, we'll get the great generalities. We will use, in a sense, the abstract mind that we've been talking about in the other class. And we'll have the general picture or ring pass knot or scope with which we will be dealing. And then when he gets into all the particulars, and this is really a book of particulars, it'll be a lot easier to absorb them, to memorize them, to organize them in the mind. Remember that the hierarchy is called the Society of Organized and Illumined Minds. So, organization of the mind is not an easy thing, but Alice Bailey said, well, it's got to be well stocked, your mind, and it's got to be organized. So that's what we're learning to do, and if it takes us a few incarnations to get to that point, okay, at least it's better to start on the process. All right, so given what we've covered here, or other thoughts about occultism that come into your mind as we cover these things, do you have any questions or any statements or, anything that you would like to discuss or to state or to mention?
While people are thinking about that, just want to mention that the Ask Meditation broadcasts next week are on the morning schedule. That means that these webinars, these meetings are on the evening schedule next week.
I welcome that.
And then we've got the full moon approaching.
Right. So Michael's been doing a really good job to keep us informed. It's like a monthly calendar, is it, Michael?
It's a weekly calendar that I've been sending out.
Weekly even. Okay, great. Well, like I say, it sure does help to have the seventh ray. When I try to do these things, you're just lucky if you know what day it's on, So anyway, we will be meeting tonight for our glamour work, the dissipation of glamour at 5 p.m. And it will be, well, this one will be a go-to webinar, It's not Zoom yet. I'm just making a slow transition because a lot of people know how to use GoToWebinar and they've been doing it. So tonight's work will be on GoToWebinar, and we'll consider another juicy glamour. There's plenty of it around right now. I just can't, almost criminal, really. I just can't believe. Master Moria warned that countries could disintegrate very rapidly under the wrong kind of leadership. And I think there are a number of countries in the world that are threatened with that possibility because of the basic egomania of the leaders. And it's a big fight about, will group consciousness finally make itself understood and preferred? So we'll do what we can to tackle a glamour. I don't know. They all circulate around the fundamental illusion of misidentification. We think that we are what we really are not, and we go on we go on serving a false self, and this leads to other illusions and emotional involvement with that process, producing the glamours, and it leads to a mess on the physical plane, the myopic mess, unthinking emotional mess, as he describes it. That's not the same thing as cosmic Maya, which is just the great world illusion that comes through limitation. It's a different thing. Okay. Anybody?
No hands raised, no comments written. I could read a definition of energy that I put together.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael, please. You can do that.
I need to unmute myself.
Oh, well,
okay.
Okay.
An intangible nature of any source in unending motion, impressed on or through a lesser manifestation, driving that manifestation into activity. As the basic dynamic substance in the universe, it is synonymous with life and is the directing influence holding a form together as a unity. It is a spiritual expression and can be imbued with specific qualities. The threefold mysteries of energy are imparted at certain initiations. The higher impulsive activity is called energy, and that higher impulsive activity is from The Destiny of Nations on page 129.
I think, I think that's very good. What you have presented, including some of the results of energy performing its function. So it's like a little paragraph, basically, and it would require analysis line by line. Do it one more time, Michael. The whole thing.
Okay. Getting back to it.
Yeah.
An intangible nature of any source in unending motion.
But now
Impressed
let's stop right there. An intangible nation of
nature of any source in unending motion.
Okay. Okay. So motion is involved in this fundamental definition of energy that, as you conceive it.
And we can look at source as anything that is essentially controlling things that are less than itself.
And that's good.
In religion, it's called God. In science, it's called something else.
So we have in philosophy a term called the prime mover. Whether it is itself in unending motion, as you define, okay, or whether it causes perpetual motion in some manner. It's called the thing or whatever that sets all things into motion. So the driving, well, energy behind all movement.
Yeah. And then it is impressed on or through a lesser manifestation.
Yes, and when it is so, and is properly directed, it sometimes is defined as a force, like the Shambhala force, in contrast with the Shambhala energy.
Right.
Force is more somehow directed by the will. Yeah.
And it drives that manifestation into activity.
Yes, whether it itself is active, of course, most energies, it depends on how we define activity, okay. But it agreed, when energy as force impacts whatever, activity or motion is the movement, is the result.
As the basic dynamic substance in the universe, it is synonymous with life.
And that's good, because that, at least that is something that I think is correct. I'll say that. Whether it's good or not, I don't know. At least it seems correct, because you say in the universe. Now, there are super universal states which have nothing to do with any universal particularity. We've had endless universes forever, but within any of those universes, we can focus and understand the concept of energy better than if we try to take it to the super universal state. And yet, there is a movement called the Great Breath. And, I sometimes ask myself, who's breathing? What's breathing? And since the Great Breath involves movement, it must be driven by something akin to what you're calling energy. So there is intra-universal energy, and then this thing, whatever it is, that engineers the flashing forth of the ray of the absolute, about which Blavatsky speaks. So some kind of noumenon of universal energy is going to be found in the supra or super universal state. Anyway, we better keep ourselves somewhat within the universe, and then we won't get lost.
For now.
For now.
It is the directing influence holding a form together as a unity.
Directing influence. And there again, of course, energy, force, we just have to see what we're dealing with there, because sometimes energy is the latency which causes the force to exist in a certain kind of function or activity. So, we have to keep on discriminating between energy and force.
Then
okay.
It is a spiritual expression and can be imbued with specific qualities. And what I was thinking in that statement is that is where the rays come from.
Mm-hmm.
The rays being qualities of divinity.
Yes, that's right. At the very height, what word can you use, of the universe, there is a primal universal septonate. It was probably derived from a singularity, which became a duad, which became a triplicity, which became that universal septonate. And in my view, all of these number gods, if I can call them that, integer gods, I call them sometimes, they derive from acts of self-perception. But, that's another matter. At least they arise. Go on then.
And then the threefold mysteries of energy are imparted at certain initiations.
Makes sense. It's a good. Is that the end of it then?
I just finish with the quote from the Destiny of the Nations about higher impulsive activity is called energy.
That's actually quite good, really, isn't it? The whole idea of impulse, which is not just some spontaneous, uncontrolled lurching into action. It is an impelling factor. What impels, bestows the power of movement upon that which is impelled. So,
and that
yeah.
differentiates it from force.
Mm-hmm. In your view, how do you see the differentiation?
Force is the way in which energy, as a spiritual expression that has poured into a lesser manifestation, is manipulated, projected, and used by that lesser manifestation. And then a quote from the Destiny of Nations again, that which is conditioned by and swept into activity through its agency is called force.
Yes, this is good. Okay, so this paragraph is very useful, and I think captures many essential factors. So thank you for that. Is there anybody that has any questions now or any statements? I mean, maybe the cat has our tongue, as they say, but
Everyone is either totally enlightened or totally confused.
Well, if I ever get confused, I hope that there's progress in it, that I become confused in a higher way. I can kind of manage that. Okay. Well, friends, we'll go on. not right now, but we'll continue with this. And DK said, did he not, that some of these things would be, how did you say it? A little bit, what was his word? Complicated. These are some preliminary technicalities which may seem at first perusal to be somewhat abstruse and complicated. But if we study them, they can prove illuminating and elucidating. And I guess, it just depends on what we are willing to do with our minds. To what type of disciplines will we subject the mind we presently have in order to grow it in inclusiveness and to sharpen it and make it more acute? Are we willing to do that? Or do we say, all these technicalities, I can't be bothered with them? Now, maybe different ray types will think differently about the answer to that question. But let's remember that DK is a second ray master, and he's writing in this book using a quality which he calls meticulous entirety. It's kind of the third ray aspect of the second ray, and it has a lot of the fifth ray in it as well. So he's going to give us the details, but more important, he's going to give us the divine pattern in which these details fit. Now, if you're the pure love type, you may not want to bother with it. If you come strictly along the Buddha line, there's a certain divine simplicity which does not elaborate all the details, and it makes its way into Shambhala. But if you want to know and absorb what DK has offered, and even if you're, not totally on the meticulous entirety line, you can still benefit greatly. And the accuracy of your assessment of the world in which you live and the worlds in which you don't yet live will be much enhanced.
Michael, Anne Veronica's hand is raised. Anne Veronica, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Do you know how to do that, Anne Veronica? Do you know how to do that?
Just click on the microphone, Anne Veronica.
Can you hear me?
There you go.
There you are, yes. And a little bit louder, please.
Hello, I'm in the car, so I might not have.
But you're pretty good. Pretty good now.
Well, I had sent those questions, but they must have been erased when you did the change. The one question I asked is, you said that being is still, but I was thinking, how can it be still when it moves into beingness? I don't know if I'm thinking.
Well, beingness and being, I'm equating that. And to me, the great mystery is how how supercosmic Maya arises. In other words, if we have a completely unarticulated state of absolute beingness, being, all these words that Blavatsky uses, she calls it beingness. What is the transition, which appears to be a kind of a movement, into supercosmic Maya, which we call absolute infinity? Now, basically, this is what I call the fundamental contradiction. there is no change ever in beingness. And yet there is the arising of a state which is subsidiary to beingness, and that we call articulated absolute infinity, or the self-reflection of the super universal God. Now, this is not God in the universe. This is God beyond any universe. This is the God whose self-reflection is an articulated absolute infinity. But the mystery to me, and I don't know how to solve this mystery, is how this secondary perception arises out of that which does not self-perceive. Absolute reality does not self-perceive. Beingness does not self-perceive. What it is so ultimate, so, I just have to say ultimate, that it contains every possibility, though in an unarticulated state. So there appears to be a movement, but being never moves. And that is the, paradox. I've sometimes called this thing the great paradox. It's not really a thing. I have a bunch of names for what should not be named, and I've called it the great paradox, because out of it comes all articulation, apparently, and yet it remains inarticulate, unarticulated. In other words, without any possibility of boundary or division. That's the best I can do for the moment.
Thank you. May I ask you things more?
Yeah, if you have. I hope you can stay on the road if you're driving.
Now I have stopped. You might be hearing my dog, which is panting because she's hot in here, but okay. I was wondering, these three fires, are they the equivalent to the physical sun, the central spiritual sun, and the heart of the sun? When we call,
yes, I think so. Yes, I think you can draw an equivalence there. Now, where is the heart of the sun really found? The central spiritual sun is cosmic monadic. The heart of the sun, as far as I know, is higher cosmic mental. There's also something called the subjective sun, which may well be connected with the cosmic astral. And then there is the lowest aspect of the sun, which appears as the sponsor of a solar system, and that is cosmic physical. So I'm kind of doing a little research on the difference between the heart of the sun and the subjective sun. When somewhere he has this idea of the subjective sun. I might try to look it up, but maybe I better not, because one can go off on a tangent. But the central spiritual sun is, when we're talking about the solar logos, is cosmic monadic. And you have seen, haven't you? What have we got here? Well, you can't look at anything right now, can you?
Oh, yes, I'm looking. I've stopped the car, but I think you were talking about the cosmic planes, the cosmic
planes.
Yes,
exactly. Cosmic monadic.
Yes.
Not cosmic etheric, because down here we also have representatives of the sun on the cosmic physical plane. Somehow on the highest level of the cosmic physical plane, we find the third aspect of the sun. Notice there's no articulation at all in this map representing cosmic astral, and I sometimes wonder whether the subjective sun is found there And right here on the very first subplane of the cosmic mental is found the heart of the sun. Now, what
Are
I'm
you
going
wanting to show that? You would
wait a
need to
second.
change
I'm
your
sorry.
screen.
Oh, I'm sorry, Michael. Yeah, here we go. So this is where the lowest aspect of the solar logos is manifesting on the highest plane, I think, of the cosmic physical. There's no articulation for the cosmic astral, but maybe something called the subjective sun is found there. And I want to look that up. You have the Alice Bailey CD-ROM, and Veronica?
Yes.
Maybe you look that up. And then on the first sub-level of the cosmic mental plane, we find the causal body and or the heart of the sun. On the second level, we find the causal body of sacred planets. That's my estimation. And on the third level down, we find the causal body of the Earth and other non-sacred planets. So let me just do one thing here. You know, now I'm intrigued by this, and if I can I find, yeah, there it is. And now, Michael, I will, you know, you remind me if I miss it, okay? And I failed to do this. I want to see if there's anything called subjective sun. Oh my goodness, 32 references? Oh no. 9 references. And if I were to attempt,
Are you going to show?
I'm going to. Sometimes the subjective sun is equivalent to the heart of the sun. And it still calls it the sustaining life. It sustains in a certain manner of speaking, but it itself is sustained by the central spiritual sun. Now let's see if I can go down one more. Well, here there's some kind of equivalent, but I don't know why did I think physical sun, subjective sun, central spiritual sun. So far there's an equivalence. Okay, but now we have something else. And this is on page 666 of Cosmic Fire. The subjective sun and its connection with the astral plane, with the Kama monastic principle and the astral body. Then comes the central spiritual sun, and then is listed the heart of the sun. So there they are differentiated, and the subjective sun, whether it's connected with a human being or with a greater being, is seen as related to an astral type of demonstration. And it gives us the secret doctrine reference to that. Yeah, look at this here. Page 664. Physical sun, subjective sun, central spiritual sun, heart of the sun. And then, you know, some amazing technicalities having to do with the structure of the higher schemes and chains. The force which flows from the heart of the sun works through a triangle formed by the Venusian scheme, the earth, and the sun. So there's plenty to think about there. The Venusian scheme is where the lords of the flame came from. And now here again we have an equivalence on page 843. Floods of energy or streams of force from the heart of the sun, and it's told that it is the subjective sun. So we've run into one reference so far where there is a differentiation. And here, you know, it seems that there are this lotus, and it's on one of the cosmic paths, concerns the heart of this, is called the heart of the sun and concerns the subjective sun. Notice the differentiation. It is not, however, possible to say more along this line. And maybe there's one more. And this is more microcosmic, concerning the personality being dimmed by the subjective sun, the light of the subjective sun influencing the soul. You have to read between the lines here with DK because he's giving a lot of hints. But there are a couple of those references which ask us to look for a subjective sun in connection with the astral plane. And I would say in connection with the cosmic astral plane. So we have cosmic physical representation of the sun, cosmic astral, I'm believing, cosmic mental, which is the causal body, and I normally call the heart of the sun, and then the cosmic monadic, which is the highest analogy to the central spiritual sun, which is the monad in man. Okay, so that's, you know, of interest, I would say. Anything else, Michael? Thank you, and Veronica.
Thank you, Michael.
Anything else, Michael? Stacy?
I am seeing no other hands raised nor questions in the chat box.
Okay, well, we're good anyway. We're you know, about as far as we should go. Now, tonight, as I said, we will have a glamour. Well, we always have glamour. Okay, but tonight we will deal with some practical approach to glamour and try to zero in and help dissipate certain of the things that are causing a real critical situation in humanity at this time. And I just want to see where I have been. And, you know, this is, what page is this, did I say, where we ended, Michael? Do you remember? Was it
It's page 38.
38, okay. Yeah, thank you. I just want to mark that out. Okay, so this was, we went from 35 to 38 pages, and then we'll go on next time from page 38 to whatever. I figure by the year 2050, at the time of the next great decision, we will be finished with our project. Let's hope that I'm not correct. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for your participation and for giving some thought to these matters, where DK is basically representing the secret doctrine material, but in a different way, and maybe in a way that has additional clarity compared to the way Madam Blavatsky was presenting it. Okay, and Michael, if you'd be so kind as to send me the results when they occur, I would appreciate it. So see some of you tonight at least, and that will be it for the moment. Lots of love, many blessings from all of us here on the communications team, and we're happy to be working with you. See you a little later, and bye-bye for now.